Greetings, Internet! HeiseNerd here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseNerd Speaks, now part of the DNA Digital Network. Thanks to the DNA Digital Network, you'll be able to find this podcast and other podcasts within the DNA Digital Network on places like iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and other places where podcasts can be found. For more details, look at dnadigitalnetwork.com. Now on to the show. Thanks again, everybody. This is HeiseNerd, and we are on HeiseNerd Speaks, my weekly podcast, where I speak about some stuff I have on my mind or some news stories. But this week, we're going to try something a little bit different. I'm going to give some personal reflection on a game series. I think that this will be something I do every few weeks, where I decide to kind of give my thoughts on where this a particular game series has gone, games that I've really loved in this series, and just kind of give my thoughts on it. And this week we are going to talk about the Legend of Zelda series. So, I guess starting off, we'll just kind of go from the beginning. The Legend of Zelda was probably my first experience as far as the NES was concerned. I remember playing it on a demo unit in a Walmart. I cannot remember the model number of that demo unit, but it's the one where it was like a clear window and you could see the cartridges and you can switch between them. I gotta remember the name of that. It's kind of rare to find. It's a collector's item now. But I remember the gold cartridge, Legend of Zelda, so I selected that, played it, and died very promptly because, you know, my 5-year-old self could not comprehend how to play this game right away. But I remember really getting into it through later on through having rented the console at video stores, because that's something you could do back in the day with that. And I think I got Zelda 2 at the same time and would play those off and on through rentals. And I finally got my copy the Christmas after we got our console in 1989. But I love this game. The open world exploration of it was just enticing to me. The idea that you weren't tethered to just beating a level and moving on to the next level like things like Mario were, whereas, you know, in this case you're just free and you need to figure it out on your own. Obviously, you know, you had things like the guidebook that came, well, the instructional book had some guide to it, you know, when you got it. And I, you know, obviously the biggest thing was finding stuff out on your own. And there was a bit of a social aspect to that too, because if you knew something, you could tell your friends about it, or vice versa. If they knew something, they could tell you about it. And that's how you kind of figured things out. Obviously there were things like the Nintendo Fun Club, before Nintendo Power came out, that you could get some stuff from too. I wasn't part of that, but, you know, the schoolyard was where you got it. But, yeah, I mean, those are some of my memories of that original Legend of Zelda. And then, of course, Zelda 2 was a big part of my childhood as an NES fan. Some people come back and say that this is not as good of a game because it's such a weird departure, but I didn't know any better, you know? I mean, growing up, these were the only two that were out, so there wasn't really a formula established yet of any sort. So, okay, we're doing this now with the second one. I will say there's some things I enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting departure. I thought that the action sequences were definitely more ramped up in the difficulty. The fights and the combat was more intense, just based on the fact that, you know, it was very sword play. There's a difficulty. The trick, just finding out how to fight things like Iron Knuckles and you know, your hand-to-hand sword combat, learning that, the trick to jump stabbing and things like that. I mean, that's an accomplishment when you learn things like that right out the gate. But yeah, I enjoyed this game. I don't think I ever ended up beating it as a kid without cheats. I think at some point later down the line as a teenager and adult, I did play all the way through it and finally beat it. The game itself is really not terrible up until you get to the very end, because it's just like a big gauntlet getting to the last palace. And once you get to it, it's super difficult. The forgiving thing is if you do game over, at least you start at the beginning of that palace instead of all the way back at the beginning of the game. As opposed to other ones where you get sent back to where you start the game. You don't lose all of your stuff, but anyway, that's a whole different story. I guess pressing on, the next game being A Link to the Past was where, that was the high point of Zelda for me, I think. I mean, obviously, getting a Super Nintendo and being a big Nintendo fan, of course I was waiting for that Zelda game to come out. And I remember it dropping, and I think I've told this story before on a previous episode of either this podcast or my other one with my buddy Gino. But I vividly remember that my first experience with that one was that, you didn't really know when games were really coming out. You had an idea, but you didn't have a specific date. And I remember, having to see that at the video store. And, I had just enough to pick that up and rent a Super Nintendo because I didn't own my Super Nintendo at the time. I think I got mine that same year at my birthday. It was like a few weeks later. But I remember having enough to rent that and everything and having to haul it home, riding on my bike or scooter or something like that. I just remember that. I got that was a nice one because when you rented it or whatever, you'd get a good chunk of the way through it. This one was nice because it kind of took some of the linearity that was in Zelda 2, put it with the overhead view of Zelda 1, and you kind of got A Link to the Past. I just really loved the fact that you just get this really dramatic opening sequence where you have to rescue Princess Zelda from Hyrule Castle, which is funny because it's like, oh, you rescued the princess. Technically, yes, but she gets captured again, needless to say. But it's just an interesting start to the game, and this one was just really nice, showcased the Super Nintendo and its capabilities. It was a really, not long, but lengthy compared to previous games, the adventure was. Especially if you didn't, if you know where everything is, the game, you can get through it pretty quickly if if you do things right. But needless to say, at its time, dungeon count was really good. And they weren't overly lengthy dungeons. They were just enough to keep you interested. Some of them kind of short, some a little bit longer. But yeah, Zelda 3, A Link to the Past, definitely, probably, it's my favorite classic Zelda. Maybe my favorite Zelda. I don't know. We'll talk about another one here a couple here that might contend. There's 3 that contend for it right now. Moving on from that, Zelda finally moved into the portable realm on the Game Boy with Link's Awakening. I don't recall owning the original Link's Awakening. I got Link's Awakening DX after I got a Game Boy Color. I remember playing Link's Awakening because I knew a friend of mine that had it, and I borrowed his. My biggest memory playing this, I didn't play it as much on the Game Boy itself as much as I actually just played it on my Super Game Boy. And let me tell you something, Super Game Boy was one of the best accessories ever made for a Nintendo system. Imagine you have a Super Nintendo and now you basically just, intensified the library on it because now you can play your Game Boy games on it. The fact that you could play your Game Boy games on a screen that actually you could see what was going on really helped too. That was, a really good game. I thought that for the Game Boy, it really was a pretty lengthy adventure, and it kind of had the same kind of heart and soul that A Link to the Past had. Albeit, the story was a little bit deviated from the original Zelda storyline, but that's okay. It still was a good and enjoyable game, and used the same formula and mechanics. So I was sold. I definitely enjoyed the game. But yeah, I think that would be one of the best Zeldas too. Moving on from that, the next one was Ocarina of Time for the N64, which was kind of a large gap. I'm pretty sure there was about, it might have been 5 years. It was either 5 or 4 years. But I remember Ocarina of Time being the biggest catalyst for me wanting to get an N64. I had saved money up from working in the fields as a teenager. I was like 15 at the time. I remember that's where I decided to spend my money. I was going to get an N64 as opposed to a PS1 because of Zelda. At the time, I didn't know that Final Fantasy VII was being released on the PS1. If I would have known that, that would have been enough to sell me on the PS1. But anyway, I digress. Ocarina of Time is definitely a good game. And I know that when it first came out, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid. I certainly followed the crowd and that, this was the best Zelda ever. But in hindsight, I would probably say that the 2D Zeldas still stand out, with one exception, and I'll talk about that later, of course. But yeah, so I mean, games like A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, which I'm going to talk about here later, those definitely stand out more to me than Ocarina of Time does now. The problem with Ocarina of Time and some of the newer Zeldas is just the amount of time you kind of have to pour into them to really be playing the game. And I could actually kind of tell you about each one of those. I mean, with Ocarina of Time, you don't really feel like you're in the game, I don't say, until probably after you've beaten the Deku Tree. Which, you're probably an hour into the game by then, maybe 30 minutes, somewhere between that. If you're fast enough, you can be done within about 30 to 40 minutes, probably. So, I mean, you have to get through all that. There are some hiccups, like the water palace, the water temple or whatever. But yeah, I mean, in that, I feel like also dungeon count's a little low. Dungeons take long too. That's another thing about these later 3D Zeldas. They tended to really expand on dungeon exploration, how long they took, which was kind of annoying because to me it's like I had to gauge whether I had enough time in a sit down to finish the dungeon or have to wait until the next time that I was going to play, because I really hated stopping a game playing session mid-dungeon, and that was kind of annoying. Moving on from Ocarina of Time, I never did play Majora's Mask. The hang-up for that was being time constrained. I hate that. And y'all can tell me, well, you can, go back and you can use that. I've heard the stories. No, I'm not doing it. Anyway, the next game was Wind Waker for me. I never really, if the Oracle games, I don't remember if those came out before or after it. I never really played those. But yeah, Wind Waker was a good game. It's probably my favorite 3D Zelda aside from the ones that use the traditional formula. Hang-ups with this one, again, really, really lacking in the number of dungeons, and they kind of expanded the length of those dungeons, which was annoying to me. I liked the ocean exploration. It kind of made the world more expansive, which was kind of cool. I was fine with that. And yeah, I thought I liked the cel-shaded look. I thought it was a really fresh take, and I thought it was a good art style, particularly for this kind of game. It kind of had a whimsical feel to it because of it, and it worked out a lot, I thought. And so, it just kind of made some of the characters kind of quirky and funny, and it was good. So, the next game that I played I know I played Minish Cap a little bit. I never really got too terribly far into it. Um, it had the 2D feel to it, and I liked it. Just I don't know what it was. I just kind of got sidetracked, and I never ended up finishing it. I do need to pick that one up and finish it. I barely scratched the surface with Phantom Hourglass. The touchscreen DS controls, I could just not do that with. I couldn't do it with a Zelda game. It would have been one thing if like you were moving with the stylus and you had a button of some sort equipped to the sword, but tapping, just I couldn't do it. Moving on to the next one, the next memorable Zelda game, Twilight Princess for the Wii, certainly was a highlight. Twilight Princess for the Wii. Because I got the Wii edition, not the GameCube edition. I don't know why I had a GameCube, or I could have gotten the GameCube edition anyway, but because I got a Wii. But I, drank the Kool-Aid again. Thought, oh, we gotta have the touch controls. I played through my experience with Twilight Princess is I got it for the Wii when I got it. I played through it and beat it. And I've maybe barely picked it up since. Anytime I've tried to pick it up, I just can't do it because this is one that just takes the experience where you have to go through a bunch of stuff before you're actually really in the game to the next level. It is forever before you are really in the game and out in the overworld and really playing the game in this one. I'm imagining at least a couple hours before you're really into it, which is kind of ridiculous. So that's my main reason why I have not picked up Twilight Princess again. That and it is pretty convoluted and takes a long time, and I'm just not really ready for an experience like that. I did forget to go to Wind Waker. Wind Waker does have a little bit of a lengthy bit too, where you do like a stealth kind of mission before you to recollect your sword and stuff before you're really playing that game too. But at any rate, that's how that is too. Next one. Skyward Sword, I hardly touched. Again, I maybe played through the point where you were really playing the game, and I still just couldn't do it. I never owned it, and I just couldn't find myself to buy it. After that, the next really positive experience with a Zelda game for me would be the DS, the 3DS game, A Link Between Worlds, which was a direct sequel of A Link to the Past. I really like this one because it's kind of almost, let's throw back to A Link to the Past, but not remake A Link to the Past. Let's take the world that was built in and put a new spin on it with some new fangled dungeons. Take the overworlds from that and kind of use the same overworld but move things around a little bit. Give the game a new aspect with the merging that you can do in the walls and stuff. And it was just a really fun game, and it's one that I gladly pick up. I like the fact that it kind of went back to some of the open games, open level world style, where you could kind of do the dungeons in whatever order you wanted. The fact that you had access to all of the sub items right away, whether you rented them or bought them, was really cool. So it kind of took the formula, kind of spun it around a little bit and changed things up, which was really awesome. I loved it. And that moves me to my next big experience, which of course was Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild I picked up on the Wii U because we already had one. I picked up a Wii U when we did because of the fact that my youngest wanted to play games on it, but I also knew that a new Zelda was coming out and it was going to be this really open world experience. So I was like, okay, let's try it out. lo and behold, they did release it on the Switch too, but that's another story. This game is great. I've done a playthrough of it on the Wii U and finished it. I did finish all 120 shrines. What I love about this game is that it's it's an open world, so you have, except for like the really first part of the game, you have a little less leeway, but once you get to where you can finally play. In this one, it also feels less like it's holding your hand when you're getting through that first part. You still have some like open play within that area, so that's kind of cool. And it kind of teaches you things without like stopping you and being like, "Oh, hey, this is how you do this," all the time. It's really, really fascinating how it does that. And it teaches you the new some of the new mechanics of the game by putting it inside of the game as opposed to like giving you like these side tutorials almost, which works really well. But once you get out in the world, it's completely open. So I mean, you can definitely go down the main storyline. You can go beat the last boss at the beginning of the game if you're really that awesome of a game player. But I'm not. So obviously it'd be hard you got to be really, really expert to do that. But anyway, you can do that. The idea that you can just go anywhere was awesome. It kind of really took back to, it was almost like a 3D new version of the original Legend of Zelda to me. It was like that open world experience brought to a new level. Of course, the social aspect of, the schoolyard was kind of taken away because now today we have the internet and things, but still, really fun game. And, there's just so many aspects of it that I really enjoy because it still feels like a Zelda game, but really it's the next step for this series. And I really hope that they see how well this game was received and kind of still stick with that. I'd be okay if they want to do some traditional formula games, maybe as a separate series, but you kind of do both. I think would be kind of a really fun idea. But yeah, I mean, those are some of my experiences with the Zelda franchise. Another side note that I kind of want to mention is that I really am enjoying the fact that I'm kind of breathing new life into some of these older Zelda games too, particularly the first one in A Link to the Past, because the fan community has done really great with making homebrew modifications and things like that. But one of the biggest things that I'm kind of into now is they have software that randomizes the original ROMs so that it's a new experience every time you play either of these games, and it makes the game that you love something new every time, and it's really cool. But those are some of my thoughts on the Zelda franchise, and I'm glad that maybe you guys were patient enough to sit here and listen to me kind of go on about it. I do want to talk about a couple of quick hit stories that I did catch. They'd catch my eye. I didn't think I could really go into long detail about either of these, but number one is I did see that the original arcade version of Punch-Out is now available on the Nintendo eShop on the Switch. They've been kind of putting out some of those older arcade games. They did versus Super Mario Brothers. Other third-party games have kind of made it onto there too. I think Double Dragon has made it onto there, and a couple others. SNK games, particularly Neo Geo ones, which is pretty cool. I like the idea that I can play some of these old classics that I hadn't played in a long time. The Punch-Out one's kind of cool just because there hasn't really been a home port of that original arcade version ever. So, I mean, we got Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, which to me is still a superior game. That's actually the favorite of mine of that series. And that maybe I could do a retrospective on that series. I don't think I could really do anything in length because there's not as many games, but yeah, I thought that was a cool story. And then another one, I did see that some of the casting has kind of come out for Captain Marvel coming out next year. And one thing that really hit my interest was that we're bringing Clark Gregg back as Phil Coulson. I was like, okay, well that makes sense because this movie takes place in the early 90s. So, I mean, obviously he's still alive. Still alive in quotes because, I mean, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but anyway, the idea that he's back is fun. I always liked him as a character, and I thought that'd be cool. On the other hand, apparently they're also bringing Lee Pace back as Ronan the Accuser. If you want to talk about villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in generic, how generic they are, I think Ronan sits at the bottom, not quite, because oh my goodness, Korath, I believe. Oh my goodness, I don't even remember his name. Whatever the villain was in Thor: The Dark World, the Dark Elf. Oh my goodness, and I'm lost because he was played by one of the doctors from Doctor Who. But yeah, I'm a little lost. I should have done my research, but he's about toward the bottom of the barrel when it comes to Marvel villains and how generic they are. I felt like he was definitely one of those that I felt like was, oh, he's a bad guy, we gotta stop him kind of villain. There's not really a whole lot of story, and maybe this will help give Ronan a little bit more background and enough incentive for me to feel like, okay, now he's a viable character in this cinematic universe, even though he's already been defeated. But at least in hindsight, I can go back and say, okay, he's not just this generic villain anymore. So I'm okay with that. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, that will be about it for the program. I do want to talk about a few different things. Number one, I do want to again thank the DNA Digital Network for letting us be a part of their program and their lineup. Again, you'll be able to find this podcast and other podcasts in the DNA Digital Network on things like iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and other places where podcasts can be found. For more details, look at dnadigitalnetwork.com. Also, just want to kind of give a shout out about my other podcasts that I do as a collaborative project with my buddy, The Real Gino, which is called the Geek Be Cubed podcast, or GB3. Last week we did a little game called Wheel of Nostalgia, which was really fun. A little bit I made up where we could kind of wax intellectually, not really intellectually, about the things that we had in our past, which was fun. And also, I also want to talk about the fact that we are going to be releasing a before and after review episode, not an actual episode of the podcast, but a bonus thing of Ready Player One, which we just both watched over this last week. I will say to start with, it was a fun flick. Definitely see it, but I'm not gonna go into detail. We'll talk about that shortly here, and that'll be up for everybody to listen to in the near future. You'll be finding that on the Geek Be Cubed channel. Just look up geek, the word geek, the space B, and then space the word cubed, and you'll be able to find us on YouTube. We have several episodes up. Please take a listen to those. Also look up the Real Gino's channel. He is the Real REEL Gino on YouTube. You'll be able to find him fairly easily as well. And I just, I got to thank him a lot. I know that, I'm sitting here just starting out with a very small, meager subscriber base, and he's been a good friend of mine for several years, and he's really just been helpful for me in the channel, and I can't thank him enough. A good friend of mine, and I really do appreciate everything he's done, and I just really do enjoy doing the work with him that we've been doing together. I just, I've enjoyed doing these programs, and I know that I don't have a ton of people listening to it, But, for those that are, thanks a lot for listening. I really do hope that I'm being entertaining, even if I'm not. It's fine because it gives me a place to where I could sit down and kind of just put my thoughts down and, orally out there in the atmosphere, so to speak. And I will be back probably with a more news-related episode next week, but I thought this would be a fun little project to try and start out and maybe do every few weeks. Get an idea of what franchise I want to kind of talk about next time that I, have followed for a long time, but we'll see how that goes. But at any rate, thanks for listening. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe on this channel. Visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/HeiseNerd1. Definitely looking for some followers there as well. At any rate, I am going to be signing off. Thanks again for listening, and I will catch everybody on the next episode of HeiseNerd Speaks. HeiseNerd, out.